What's going on, bottom line viewers? It's Mitch back here with week number 3 of your fantasy football stardom and situm. And yes, I understand I'm a little bit late. Sorry about that. But hopefully you don't have a bad fantasy team and you're not starting a lot of Dolphins and Jags. And hopefully I can help you for Sunday and Monday night football. Before I give you my starts and sits at every position from quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and defense, make sure you do Gronk spike that like button and subscribe to the Bottom Line View for more fantasy content, stardom and situms each and every NFL week. Also, NFL content each and every day. Comment your fantasy questions below. Let me know your start and sit questions so I can respond in my weekly Stardom and Situm response video on Saturday. That is where I'm going to be responding. No more am I going to constantly be replying to your comments. I am going to be doing it in depth in a video on Saturday right before Sunday, so we know exactly what to do with our fantasy lineups going into Sunday's football. And guys, one last thing before I give you my starts and sits at every position. This is very important, especially for you guys that want to win your fantasy league and want any more fantasy advice from me or from the channel, from the Bottom Line View. You got to head over and follow the BLV, the Bottom Line View Instagram. Very crucial. Why? Because I'm going to post, and I already have this season, posted my starts and sits each and every week. I'm going to have the same graphics that you see in this video. The quarterback starts, quarterback sits, running back starts, running back sits, and so on the Instagram. So instead of coming back to this video 4 or 5 times to see, oh, Mitch said start these quarterbacks, these receivers, you could just go to Instagram, give it a follow, and then you can just see the pictures and scroll through and see. And then you can ask me questions on Instagram where there's a lot less commenters and there's a lot more chance that I respond. So make sure you go to the Instagram and give it a follow. There's also a ton of exclusive content on the Instagram for NFL and NFL related. All right. Those are the shouts. Those are the advertisements from me. Let's get to the details. Fantasy starts and sits. The quarterback position. Let's kick it off with Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford is comeback candidate number 1 for this fantasy season in week number 3. He's getting his number 1 go-to receiver back, most likely in Kenny Golladay. I think that's going to open up this passing offense. Matthew Stafford has not been at his best, but in a game versus Kyler Murray, that they had a showdown last year, toe-to-toe, back and forth, offensive game. I think we're going to see the same in 2020 that we saw in 2019. Kyler's going to put up points on this bad Lions defense, and Matthew Stafford's going to have to keep his team in it. And he's going to have that go-to target that's going to open up and allow the other receivers to have better matchups as well, allowing this passing offense to really thrive. So I think Matthew Stafford's about to have his bounce-back stretch here, starting with the Arizona Cardinals. Big Ben Roethlisberger versus the Houston Texans. I love any quarterback, but especially Ben versus the Texans. Ben is starting to feel himself with these new group of targets and wide receivers, whether it's Chase Claypool as the downfield or red zone target, Deontay Johnson as that separator, or Juju out of the slot. Big Ben is starting to gain chemistry, and I've noticed that the Steelers are not very good at running the football. Even versus a Texans team that's not very good at defending the run, I think this is going to be a pass-first approach offensively for the Steelers, and they're definitely going to attack that weak secondary that's very vulnerable to the big play. I think Big Ben's going to hit the big play multiple times in this game. Ryan Tannehill versus the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings secondary is dreadful. Every week, I'm going to tell you to start the quarterback that plays the Vikings defense. I did last week, and I understand Rivers did not really come through with a huge performance from a fantasy perspective, but you got to understand what that means for Tannehill. He was very efficient. And Tannehill is a very accurate, efficient passer. And I expect Tannehill, who's in a more explosive offense, to put up more points and to probably put up some touchdowns throwing the ball, because he's looked like a top 10 quarterback this year thus far. And I expect Tannehill to have another awesome game. Tom Brady versus the Denver Broncos. Yes, the Broncos have a pretty good defense. And yes, Tom Brady has not been good for fantasy, but I'd give him one more go in week 3. Why? Because the Broncos' weakness to their defense is their cornerback position. The Bucs have great receivers. They're getting Chris Godwin back. Tom Brady's starting to learn the tendencies of this offense, of his players around him, where to go with the ball when, who he trusts, and those are all things essential to Tom Brady. He also ranks as the 3rd best quarterback thus far this season in terms of throwing and passing the football by PFF. That means he's playing well. He might not be putting up the stats quite yet because mostly his receivers are dropping the ball. Most drops in the NFL thus far. 2 touchdowns dropped versus the Panthers. If he would have had those caught, he would have had a big fantasy day and people wouldn't be dropping him and giving up on him just yet. Don't give up on him yet. Start him versus the Broncos and reap the benefits. My quarterback sits. Let's start off with Matt Ryan versus the Chicago Bears. Chicago Bears are by far the best defense that Matt Ryan has faced thus far this season. Matt Ryan has faced a terrible Cowboys defense and a dreadful Seahawks defense. And in both games, he has lit up the lamp, right? But Matt Ryan might be without his go-to receiver in Julio in this game, and that is concerning. As good as Calvin Ridley has been, that's an all-time great receiver that might not be playing. And if he isn't, I definitely bench Matt Ryan. If he is, I get it. He's been playing really well. I wouldn't mind starting him here. But I think there's better matchups with similar type of fantasy quarterbacks. It's not like Matt Ryan's going to give you anything from a running perspective, so it kind of hurts his ceiling in that regard. Matt Ryan might still be a decent floor play, but in week 3, I don't see the ceiling given that this is probably, again, the best defense he's played, a pretty good pass rush, a pretty good defensive team in Chicago, and this game's going to be tight. It's not like Matt Ryan's going to have to be throwing from behind like he did versus Seattle to put up all these fantasy points. So Matt Ryan is probably more of a sit than a start this week. I understand why you would start him because of his hot start, but I'm just warning you, he probably won't put up his biggest numbers of the season. Carson Wentz versus Cincinnati. The Bengals, yes, their defense is not good, but Carson Wentz is worse than not good. He has been dreadful, horrible, horrendous, bad, okay? In 2020, he has been the least accurate passer, the most off-target passes of 2020 thus far, according to PFF, Carson Wentz. If you haven't dropped him yet, I'd suggest you do. At least bench him. He's not worth starting. He's not worth playing the way that this offense looks right now. Derek Carr versus New England. I understand Derek Carr played very well on Monday Night Football. You saw it. I saw it. The world saw it. But he's now playing New England in New England. This secondary, that's a little PO'd after the way they played versus Seattle and Russell Wilson. And you got to understand that people are going to recognize that that was just how good Russell Wilson is. It has nothing to do with how good New England's defense is, because it's really good. And Derek Carr is going to struggle to make and create big plays in this game. I don't see him having a very high ceiling at all in this game. So even if you think you like what you saw from Carr, I'd be hesitant here. Jared Goff versus Buffalo. Jared Goff has been good for real-life purposes for the Rams. He's been winning games. He's been accurate. He's been on the money. But for fantasy, he's just been all right. And he's now playing the best defense he's played all season by a mile. The Bills' defense is very good, very talented, and very well-schooled and coached. They won't be taken advantage of with all these scheme plays that McVay likes to run. This is by far McVay's biggest challenge in an opposing defensive coach that he has faced this season. I'm intrigued to see how it goes down, and I'm probably going to lean towards sitting Goff this week because this defense and this game is probably going to be very, very tight and defensive and grind it out. And these two teams are very well balanced, very competitive, but I just don't see Jared Goff's numbers being super high in this one. My running back starts. Let's go with Kenyon Drake versus the Lions. Okay, I get it. Kenyon Drake has not exactly lived up to his first round billing or maybe his early second round billing for you in fantasy. But he's gotten plenty of the football, plenty of opportunities. It's just a matter of time before he scores a touchdown. This week, he's facing maybe the worst run D in the NFL after they just got lit up by Aaron Jones. I would start Kenyon Drake one more week. Don't trade him yet. Don't give up yet. He's been pretty good. I think he'll be really good in week 3. McKinnon versus the Giants. McKinnon is an explosive playmaker. He still has that speed, that shiftiness, that game-breaking ability that the Niners signed him for a couple of seasons ago. He's now getting his opportunity to be their lead back the way that he was designed to, the way that he was signed to a couple seasons ago. Mostert is out. Coleman is out. McKinnon stepping up. He's going to take the lead role. Receiving game, he's awesome. Running game, he can break a big play. And the Giants are just not a very good team. I think McKinnon could score here, maybe even multiple times. Kelly versus Carolina. Kelly is just a perfect complement to what the Chargers have in Austin Eckler. He ran the football a ton last week, and I think we'll see the same versus Carolina. Remember, the Bucs, they ran the football in that fourth quarter with Leonard Fournette. He broke a big gain and a big touchdown in that game. Kelly is a very similar looking back with a very similar play style. So you could see the same thing in a game where, okay, the Chargers are favored, so are the Bucs. That means plenty of opportunity for the Chargers to run the rock in the fourth quarter. David Montgomery versus the Atlanta Falcons. I really like what I've seen from David Montgomery thus far this season. He's been really, really good. He looks like the player that we thought he was coming out of the draft. He's now living up to it. I like the way Chicago is running the football. They're utilizing more 2 and 3 tight end sets, and they're just getting him the football in more advantageous positions to make plays. He probably scores a touchdown in this game. He probably has around 100 yards. I think Montgomery's being slept on as probably the rest of the season, maybe even a running back 1 for your fantasy team. My running back sits, David Johnson versus Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh, with the Bucs, is allowing under 3 yards per carry this season in 2020 to running backs. That's not good, in case you don't know. Their defensive line is dominant. Their front seven is awesome. It's explosive. It's powerful. It's strong. It's fast. And they're going to shut down David Johnson in the run game. Now, maybe David Johnson gets a ton of touches. He makes up for it. Maybe you have to start him because you have no other options due to all the injuries, and I get it. But just expect that David Johnson's not going to have a very high ceiling in a game versus this Steelers defense that might be the best in the league. The Tampa Bay running backs versus Denver. Like I mentioned with Tom Brady, I think this is going to be a pass-heavy game script for the Bucs and Tom Brady, meaning that Ronald Jones or Leonard Fournette will not get a lot of touches, and even if they do, we don't know which one it's going to be. Jones started the game, Fournette became the closer at the end of the game. We're still kind of figuring out what the roles are in the backfield, and if either of them are worthy of a start each and every week. And because the Broncos also have a really good run defense, it's not really making me want to start either one either. Todd Gurley versus the Chicago Bears. Gurley has just not looked explosive. He's not really breaking tackles. He's not really creating yards after contact. He's not involved as a receiver. He's a very touch-driven play at this point in fantasy. He's going to get a lot of the football, but he's not really a big-time playmaker anymore, and he just looks hesitant on that knee. I'm concerned about him moving forward, especially versus a good defense like the Bears. You have Melvin Gordon versus the Bucs. The Bucs are the best run D in the NFL, featuring the best tandem of linebackers in David and in White, with Sue and Vita Vea in the middle. It's just going to be difficult for Gordon to find room, and then with White and David covering him out of the backfield, it's going to be difficult for him to get the football in open space and make a play and make something happen after the catch. They've been very good versus McCaffrey and Kamara in the first 2 games. Gordon's worse than those 2 guys for sure. And the Broncos, with their lack of quarterback, I don't see Gordon scoring a touchdown either. So I just don't like this play this week. My wide receiver starts. Let's start off with Darius Slayton, who might be kind of a sleeper start this week. Slayton's going to have more opportunity and more of the football with Shepard being out. And Daniel Jones, this offense in general is going to be more pass heavy in neutral game script, which means without Saquon, Daniel Jones, we're going to see what he offers. And the Giants are going to be able to make a decision on if he is truly the future of this team, as well as Slayton being truly the number one for the future of this team. I think he has that ability. It's just a matter of him getting the football. And because Richard Sherman is out in this game, I think he has a clear mismatch on the outside. I think he could put up big numbers. Kenny Golladay versus Arizona, if he's back, if he's playing, if he's in the lineup, I'm starting him. There's no doubt about it. Just don't be dumb. Start him, please. I understand that he's got Patrick Peterson, but hey, Patrick Peterson is not the same Patrick Peterson we know and we used to fear as fantasy owners. He led up a lot of yards to Terry McLaurin. Kenny Golladay is also a very good receiver. He's excellent in go up and get it situations, and he's going to have a ton of red zone opportunities in this game. I think Stafford's really going to target him a lot if he does suit up. CeeDee Lamb versus Seattle. Lamb could feast in this game. I really love him this week as both a normal play and a DFS play as well, a season-long play and a DFS play. He's just going to have a great matchup versus the nickel corner that does not exist in Seattle. Like, they had Jamal Adams one-on-one with Julian Edelman, and we knew that Edelman on Sunday night, he had like nearly 200 yards. So Lamb could have a huge game in this game if he lines up in the slot a majority of his snaps, which he has been. Ridley also feasted in week 1. So there's a good track record thus far versus Seattle of this receiver having success. Lamb's looked better and better each week, is getting more and more opportunity, and he's just really talented. And they're just going to get him the football in a game that is probably going to be a shootout. Corey Davis versus Minnesota, another similar sleeper to the Slayton pick. I think Davis, as the number one receiver now, with A.J. Brown being out with injury, versus the worst secondary maybe in football is between them and Atlanta, I guess. Davis has an opportunity here to create a few big plays, and we know he has the athletic profile. We know he has the ability. As long as he gets the targets, which I think he will, he has the opportunity to really put up some big fantasy points. So I like him as a wide receiver 3. I wouldn't really trust him as a 1 or a 2 this week, but as a 3 with high upside, I love it. My wide receiver sits, Henry Ruggs versus New England. I just don't see a good matchup on the field for Ruggs. I think he's going to see Jonathan Jones a lot, maybe even a little Stephon Gilmore. And Ruggs has been better in real life for this team than he has for fantasy purposes. Really, I mean, fantasy-wise, he hasn't been getting the football, but it is opening up the offense, just the fact that he's on the field because he threatens defenses with his speed. But we know Derek Carr doesn't want to throw the ball down the field. And Ruggs, if he's not getting plays designed for him, I'm just not interested in him being in my fantasy lineup, especially versus this matchup. AJ Green doesn't look like himself, and now he's matching up with shadow coverage from Darius Slay. He's still good in contested situations, but Joe Burrow and him have not seemed to click thus far. I think other players are going to thrive while AJ Green sees the best corner on each and every team. Emmanuel Sanders versus the Packers. If he did not put up big numbers with Thomas out of the lineup versus the Raiders, he's not going to do it versus a better secondary with less opportunity. Sanders is old. He doesn't look like the same explosive weapon he used to be, and Breeze looks bad. Stephon Diggs versus the Rams. This is the shocker of the sit section. Diggs is a great player who's playing phenomenally, and his quarterback and him have really had some sort of connection. But the big playability is going to be capped when he faces Ramsey. In the past, Diggs has not put up good numbers versus some of the best corners in the league. When he has a tough matchup, he hasn't really shown up. He's played the Jets and the Dolphins, which are easy matchups to thrive in. I'm concerned about Diggs putting up wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 numbers this week facing Jalen Ramsey. He could still be a wide receiver 3 or maybe a flex for you, but I don't think he's going to be a number 1 or a number 2 this week. My tight end starts. Hawkinson versus Arizona. Hawkinson had a huge game, the best of his career in week 1 of his rookie season, his debut, where he put up over 100 yards and Matthew Stafford targeted him early and often. In this game, Isaiah Simmons has looked like absolute you-know-what. And TJ Hawkinson is athletic. He can beat Hicks in the open field. He can beat Campbell in the open field. And he can make plays. And he's shown his ability through these first 2 weeks at times. I do like him as kind of a flyer and as a ceiling play versus the Cardinals in a high-scoring shootout type of game. Hayden Hurst for Chicago. I'm starting Hurst if Julio does not go because that means more targets for Hurst in the middle of the field. Sample versus Philadelphia. This is a guy that I targeted in the waiver wire, and if you need a start or if he's out there in your league, I'd suggest picking him up because he has upside. He's a former second-round pick with a lot of talent, and he already has chemistry and continuity with his young quarterback who targeted him a ton in the second half versus the Browns. I think with the Eagles having terrible linebackers and slow safeties, Sample could have a big game. Dallas Goedert versus the Rams. The Rams have bad linebackers as well, and Goedert, I think, is the best tight end on the Eagles. I said it, and I think the Eagles are treating him in that way as well. My tight end sits. Let's start off with Noah Fant versus the Bucs. Fant's going to be facing Devin White, Levante David, Antoine Winfield Jr. All players are outstanding, great in coverage, and are super athletic and fast. Noah Fant is not going to be able to create the big play with lackluster quarterback play and is not going to see a lot of targets in a low-volume offense. I think Fant is going to be a sit for a while, especially versus this defense. Chris Herndon, I get it. We loved him coming in as a sleeper candidate, but he's just simply not running enough routes. He's not being utilized well enough, and Adam Gase just sucks, guys. He's not utilizing his best weapon, which I believe is Herndon, and now he's facing a tough matchup in Darius Leonard and those linebackers on the Colts. I can't see it improving this week. Tyler Higbee versus Buffalo. If he's your starter, I get it. You should start him. I agree. But the Bills are a tough matchup. If you have two good quality tight ends and you're debating between one or Higbee, I'd probably lean to the other guy because Buffalo is really good in the middle of the field. Edmonds and Milano are back, which means that what happened versus Miami won't replicate. And if you're betting on that, I wouldn't bet on it. I just wouldn't. Logan Thomas versus Cleveland. Cleveland, yes, are bad versus tight ends, but I just don't see the upside in this matchup. Thomas is going to get maybe 3 or 4 catches for like 30, 40 yards, but that's about it. That's all he's going to produce for the entire season. I'd rather go with the high upside option like I offered you in my start section. My defense sits. I'm going with the Tennessee Titans versus Minnesota. You know, I've been really saying that the Minnesota defense sucks, but the offense is just as bad. Tennessee's defense isn't great, but Cousins, the way he's playing and turning the football over, and their offensive line's dreadful. I think Tennessee is actually a sneaky start. Tampa Bay versus Denver. This is probably the start of the week. The defense that could have like a pick six, multiple sacks, turn the football over because of the quarterback play that they will be facing. And because this defense flies around, they're aggressive. They got after Teddy last week. I think they're going to have a big week and maybe win you the week this week. Indianapolis versus the Jets. The Jets are terrible. They're the worst team in football. I mean, they got Chris Hogan playing receiver. The Colts defense isn't great, but it isn't bad. I think they have a good game here for the second week in a row. Those are my starts for fantasy football week 3, my stardom and my situm. Again, guys, make sure you do follow the Bottom Line View Instagram. Gronk, spike that like button and subscribe for more. It's Mitch. Leave your questions below. Peace.